Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we explore your questions to help you make meaningful connections with teenagers, because no teen deserves to feel alone. Have a question you'd like us to address? Email us at podcast@teenlife.ngo. Now, let's jump into this week's question.
What does anxiety look like at school? If you are like me and you are in education or have students in education, I have a high schooler. I see this from all sides of the coin, it seems like, on a daily basis. So today we're going to answer that question. What does it look like at school? What does it look like for students? What does it look like for staff members? What does it look like for you as a parent? We're going to kind of try to cover all bases. And just as a reminder, this is like our new podcast format. We are going to answer questions. And if you have any, please send us some, because we would love to answer questions from our listeners to help you with the things that you need help with, because that's what we are here for. So today, let's start off with this. What do you guys, from y'all's perspective as former students, as Karlie, you have two kids that have started school now, and you work with school staff, and Caleb, you work with school staff as well. What do you all see? What does it look like for you whenever you see anxiety in school?
Well, I do have, he's little, so he's not a teenager. But last year we dealt with some of this with my son. He loved school, but if there was a sub, he would panic. Like, he would fixate on it before we left for school. He would talk about it like, she's not going to be there. She's not going to be there. Well, who is going to be there? Well, what if y'all forget me at school? What if I'm not? Like, he would go run through all these what ifs. He would go to the nurse and like complain about like he was coughing or having trouble breathing, and like we kind of got to a point where like, is he really? Because the nurse was like, he seemed fine to me. Or was that his anxiety coming out of when he would feel anxious thoughts or feelings that he'd be like, I need to go to the nurse? And so that's kind of what we've seen and walked through with my son. He's doing much better this year, which is great. But it's really hard to sit there and kind of be like, as someone who doesn't struggle with anxiety as much, be like, come on, suck it up, go to school. It's not that big of a deal. You're going to have fun. You have all these friends. Yeah. But like, we have to sit in that moment and make them feel heard, also without coddling them, being like, sure, you don't have to go to school today because there's a sub. And so finding that balance. And I know we're going to talk about that some more too, but
that's interesting. Yeah. That's like, usually kids are like, oh, sweet sub, I get to watch a video or do easy worksheets. But yeah, that's interesting. Caleb, what about you?
Especially since the school year started up, and I've interacted with my students in the youth group and stuff like that, just like, hey, how's school going? It's like interesting to me because like I know I was a little weird. I always enjoyed going back to school a little bit, like after summer, things like that. I'm like, man, I miss my friends. I even miss like a few teachers, like just like structure and being able to like do things and like I know what to expect. And now it's just kids don't like school, and it's just kind of like this tends to be the answer I get, like, how's school? Okay. And I think like too, what I've realized is like, school is an anxious place. Like, it just is. Like, students, you're getting graded on things, like you're getting a literal feedback numerical grade on how well you're doing or not. Like, that's stressful. That can cause anxiety. The whole like social situation, everything, like, it's just like, it's an anxious place. And so like having grace, and I don't know, like, it's probably not even a thing where like every student experiences anxiety going to school every single day, but I would almost promise you every student has felt anxiety going to school, whether it's about a test, whether it's about a substitute teacher asking a girl out during lunch period. Like, I'm sure like this is someone like everybody's experienced anxiety at school, just because it's an anxious place of just of a lot of things to be anxious about. So
I think whenever I was in school, like, I definitely had anxiety and had anxious moments or areas of my life, but like school actually felt like it wasn't anxious for me. And then like looking back, I think it's more because that was like kind of like you. I liked being around my friends. I liked doing what I was doing. I was definitely on the shyer side younger, but when I got to high school, that kind of all went away. But My anxiety was always more around getting the stuff done that I needed to get done because I had band and I was in basketball and I had a job and I had, a single mom, so I was having to take care of, siblings as well. And so like my anxiety was more about the amount of work that was due. And so that's a lot of that was where I struggled the most. And so, some things that if you're listening, like especially as a parent, if the things you might notice is like the kid might not want to go to school, kind of like what Karlie was saying about her son, if they're isolated, if I think my oldest is kind of like this in some ways. Like he's one of those people that has like 3 friends and he's perfectly fine with that, and that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But for a while, it felt like he was isolating himself. Like I was just like, why are you always by yourself, or why are you eating by yourself? That kind of stuff. So it might be isolation in school. Like if your student is talking about like or never talking about people that they're hanging out with, that might be something to kind of like probe a little bit and just kind of fill out. Is it because again sometimes it can be okay. Like that's in my kid's case. If they're complaining about being sick a lot, that's a pretty clear cut sign. I think that's a pretty obvious sign for most people. In like I said, in my case, not bringing back projects or homework. Sometimes the anxiety of just not turning things in because you don't want to get a bad grade. Like even though like as an adult you look at that and you're like, hey, as long as you turn it in, you're at least going to get something. But as a kid, you think, I don't want to be judged. I don't want to turn that in because I don't want to know how bad I did it, and I don't, or and lots of things go into that. But and then and like just body language, like sometimes it's hormones, sometimes it's not, sometimes it can be more than that. And so just kind of being in tune with your student to know what's going on with that kind of stuff. The other thing too that I see a lot in my son is, and this is something that you kind of have to kind of toe the line as a parent, is my son does not want to have conversations with teachers, like ever. Like if it's a confrontation or if it's I need to go ask a question, he will always revert to emailing them, which I know some of that is the generation in the society that we're in, but like as a parent, I'm trying to also instill like it's okay to have a face-to-face conversation in these situations, because sometimes those things go better face-to-face than they do. Like especially if you're talking about, hey, I need to make up work or I'm struggling, it's not going to come across as well in an email as it will face-to-face. And so like that causes my son anxiety. Like he won't go talk to teachers like unless I basically am shoving him there. And so I don't know if anybody else has seen that in their students before, but like that's something that like I know causes my son anxiety a lot, for sure.
Interesting. Now, last week we talked about vicarious trauma, and one of the things we talked about was kind of setting boundaries or like verbalizing if you need boundaries or a break. So especially for adults and our school people, if you are having any anxious thoughts throughout the day or throughout the year, that is also an opportunity for you to verbalize your thought process so that students can see that model. I think it's important that we also model healthily how to take care of ourselves. So if you're like, hey, I'm having a really, and you don't have to go into details, but even just something like, hey, I'm having a really tough day, so I'm going to sit at my desk for 5 minutes. I want y'all to work on something and then we'll get back into it. Like kind of talking them through what that looks like so that they can do that too. But I think something that we're going to try to do in all of our episodes is kind of give a perspective shift of something to think about differently. And the first thing is it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay for our students to feel anxious, but we can still expect them to do hard things. And so I think sometimes unintentionally, if our students are worried about something or having anxious thoughts, and I'm going to use the word coddled, but that might be too strong of a word, but you help them in ways, what you're actually telling them, or you're like stepping in to rescue them, what you're unintentionally telling them is that you don't think they can do it on their own. Like where you're trying to help them, in the back of their mind, they're like, man, mom doesn't think that I can do this, or this teacher doesn't think that I can do this project. And so she's giving me different things than everyone else. Like it's okay to acknowledge, and if they need help, but be like, hey, but I still expect you to do this. I know this is going to be difficult, but you still have to show up to school. You still have to do your work. You still have to come to practice, all of those things. And so I think that's really important too, of don't just let them check out and be like, well, you don't have to do this today. That's not how that works.
Yeah. And from the school's perspective too, if and listen, like I've struggled with this as a parent, but if you are trying to fix everything and if you are always trying to have the conversation instead of your student, especially as they get older, that's going to create a weird student teacher relationship too, of either the teacher will not trust to talk to the student and they will go directly to you, and that creates a weird middleman, or it's going to make them think that they aren't quite ready for the maturity level that's maybe some things require in high school, like whether that be athletics, extracurriculars, whatever it may be. Like, I mean, like at some point, you kind of have to let the students take care of their stuff, even if they are anxious for that reason. Again, we're talking about teenagers mainly, and especially probably older teenagers especially, but at some point you kind of have to let them process through that in their own way, and including taking care of it as well.
Well, I have an example. When I was in high school, we unfortunately, we took advantage of one of our teachers because she would be like, "Oh, you poor things." But we would talk about how much homework we were getting on Wednesday nights. And we're like, "We've got church, we've got practice, it's late." And she was like, "Oh, that is unacceptable. No homework on Wednesday nights in my class. And I'm going to go to all your other teachers." And then that class became it was a geography class. This is no surprise if you know me, because I'm awful with geography. I don't know where anything is. Because, like, for example, when we studied Africa, we watched The Lion King. Like, that's just kind of what we did in her class, because she was worried that we had too much on our plate. But then what that also meant is, like, she didn't think we could do that. She didn't push us. I did not leave that class better than how I came into her class, because she was so worried about everything that we had on our plate that she was going to take all of that away. Now, that is obviously an extreme example, and like our wonderful teachers are probably not doing that. But that's where, like, in her mind, she was trying to be helpful. She wanted to help. But at some point, like, if you take everything away, or if you make it where none of it's difficult, they're not going to leave better. They're not going to leave more prepared for you. But at the same time, like, it's okay to sit there and validate their feelings of, like, "Hey, I know this is hard."
Yeah.
You don't have to look at them and be like, "This is easy. It's going to be fine," when that's just not the truth. Or they're sitting there going, "I'm really struggling." Like, it's okay to be like, "Hey, I know what I assigned today is difficult." Or, "I know that what you're going through with your friends today is not fun or easy, but let's think through what are some steps that we can take to make this? What do you need from me to make this happen?" But put that on them and make them answer that, instead of you just being like, "Here's how I'm going to help you today," or "Here's what you should do."
So, coming from the school staff, talking about perspective shifts, if you are a school staff listening in, it's very easy to immediately write off like a student or a teen for being quote unquote lazy or whatever in these situations. And listen, I'm very, very guilty of that as well, when I was a teacher, and still to this day sometimes as well. But it's if you're seeing these signs too, there are things you can do as a teacher to maybe help with that. Like, one thing I know that I did as a teacher is that whenever I had something heavy in the class, like either like a quiz or some sort of hard assignment, I would have the room be calm when they came in, like whether it's with music, maybe the lights dimmed a little bit. And then I would also preface, like, "Okay, today, here's what's going to be in front of you." I would lay out the plan in front of them, because like that helps. Really, it helps everybody, but it especially helps those anxious filled teens. And just kind of knowing, and again, teachers are doing this. Like, some of you are probably listening, like, "Yeah, like, dummy, I do this already." But like, just kind of being aware of all those things. Of, if you are coming in hot, it's going to set them up for a problem, like an anxious problem as well. So like, sometimes that perspective of, if a kid is always going to the bathroom in your class, or always going to the nurse, getting sick, or always late on homework, we talk a lot about, at Teen Life, about how what they're bringing to school with them, like that might be a time to check in and just be like, "Hey, like, you tell me, how are you today? I don't care about work. I don't care about what's going on in class. How are you? Like, where are you at, 1 to 5?" And then just kind of checking out. And if they tell you 3, 4, 5, whatever, and you just kind of move on, or you kind of make a mental note, like, "Hey, they're not ready yet," or "They're not telling me the truth," or maybe they really are fine and I need to get over and to move past it, and that kind of thing. And so, just as a school staff, just kind of keep in mind that, like, just as we as adults deal with this stuff on a daily basis, they're dealing with it, tenfold sometimes. And so, and we don't know the whole story behind it, what they're going through either. So some tips and takeaways, like some easy things that we can do that we can start today if we wanted to. No matter if you're a parent, a minister, student, whatever it may be, point out the things that they are doing well and the things where they are showing bravery through anxiety. If you know, like I'll use my son as an example. If I know that my son struggles with those interactions, and if I know that he has taken initiative and done that with his teacher, I immediately point out, hey, great job on that, thank you for doing that kind of thing. And it just kind of solidifies, like, not one, that's the kind of behavior that I need him to do as a parent, but two, it also solidifies, like, I'm recognizing that was a hard thing for him to do, and it's okay. Like, and I'm glad that he did it.
Yeah. And I think too, like, even like you said, like, as being a teacher, and like, man, if I'm like assigning a hard test or like something that was like will probably cause these kids anxiety, because hey, it's the final exam, and there's a few kids who will fail this class. Maybe let's make this an environment where, like, even they're stepping into it calm. I think even as a parent, right, knowing some of these things, knowing some of these anxiety triggers for your kids, and then being conscious about like even for me, like, I think back to my dad would take me to get like Chick-fil-A breakfast. Like I could slam a chicken biscuit. And so like that was something I looked forward to, and he did it on like game days. And that for me, like, I was always a little anxious on game days. Like, it was school, yes, but like also like the going through getting ready for the game, and the game itself was a trigger for anxiety for me. And I don't even think he was conscious about it, but even just something to look forward to. And it wasn't even necessarily like, let's talk about your anxiety today.
Yeah.
But it was just something that gave me something to look forward to, that kind of helped ease that day. And so, like, if you know that there's a big test coming up or a trigger for anxiety, even just creating a space or something that they can look forward to that day. I also think, like, having conversations with your student on like their time, because I look back, like, in my time as a student, and even talking to some parents I have, like, a conversation coming right out of school. Hey, how is school? Let's really dissect this day. And if school's an anxious place for them, they're probably not want to have that conversation just leaving that place that caused them anxiety. They're probably still in fight or flight, still trying to process. And so just creating the right times to have those conversations. I know a parent who brings their dog with them whenever they pick the kids up from school, and that just helps even the conversations in the pickup line immediately, because it's something that they feel comfortable with and reminds them of home and they feel safe around. And so I think there's just like little ways to create spaces that your students feel calm, even in that you can control as a parent. Having those conversations on the time, try most of the time on their end, that works with them after they've processed, instead of just the fight or flight of leaving school.
Well, I think too, especially if you're on a school campus and you're seeing this at school, one thing, Tobin kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but like believing the best about your students, of if they're not turning something in, or if something went wrong, like, now there are one-offs and there are bad days, but like trying to think through, like, there might be a reason for that. And can I start asking questions that are going to get to the bottom of that without being invasive? But if you have a student who just regularly cannot get assignments turned in on time, of like, hey, how's life at home going right now? Or, hey, what are your responsibilities? Do you have a job? Are you doing sports? Are you in band? Do you have siblings that you have to pick up and take places after school? Like, what is going on, and figuring out how you can help them? Or are you worried about this? And is there something I can give you to help you prep ahead of time that's going to let you know, without giving them the answers, but hey, there are going to be, I had teachers do this before, which was really helpful before a test. There are going to be 3 questions that you have to write answers for, and there are going to be 50 multiple choice. Yeah. They didn't necessarily tell me what the answers were, but that way I could get my mind wrapped around of, okay, I at least know what to expect if it's not like I'm going to have to sit there and write for an hour. And so thinking of ways that you can help if you have anxious students, and maybe if you know you have an anxious student and they've talked to you about that, seeing ahead of time, like, hey, is there anything I can do that you think would help the class? Don't put it just on them, but what would help the class feel better about this? And they might have some good ideas that you could use. as well. I'm
Yep.
also going to link a podcast episode, especially if you're a parent and like have a student who doesn't want to go to school, that kind of dives more into that and how to help them outside of school with school anxiety. So we'll link that too if you want to check the show notes.
Yeah, and just one last practical thing is it gets really easy to get bogged down in the negative. Just ask them 2 things that are going well in their life right now. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it could literally be 2 versus 1,000 bad things, but what are 2 things that are going well? And especially with teenagers and boys especially, you'll get the nothing's going, or like, I'm at school, so nothing, it's like you might get angst and, stuff for it, but just like, I always kind of say like, hey man, like, what's a good meal you had lately? Like, just like, and then that kind of opens up an easy, accessible answer. And so like, just those are things that you can do to kind of, because like, we're just trying to get their brain to think positively, at the very minimum, get their mind off of what's causing them anxiety in that situation, especially. So those are a couple of practical things that you can do in the car today if you wanted to.
All right, well, that's a wrap on this question. So subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss our upcoming questions and episodes. And then, like we said at the beginning, please send us your questions. We want to know what questions you have and what would be most helpful for you and the students that you are around. So you can reach out on social media or you can email them to podcast@teenlife.ngo. I'll also link that in the show notes for you to find, and we'll see you next time.